Matthew Barber, Andy Burnhams has committed to reviewing this early prisoner release scheme. Is that the right decision?
Well, I certainly hope it is, but once again, with Andy Burnham, we don't know any of the details. I think the news that Andy Harper's killers might be released early has shocked people in Thames Valley. Obviously, it has a huge impact on the family. But this really just highlights the wider problems with the Sentencing Act. I think it's right that these killers should stay in prison and serve their sentence. I think that's what most people would expect, but it's not good enough just to review things around this case. We need to have a proper look again at the Sentencing Act and some of the perhaps unintended consequences that it creates.
Because some Conservatives are saying just cancel the early release entirely. But would you say don't go that far, just exclude, sex offenders and serious criminals from this early release?
Well, undoubtedly, we do have a challenge around prison places, but the solution cannot surely be to say we're going to let thousands of criminals back out onto our streets, which is going to put more pressure on our police officers, who are just going to be going around rounding these people up again for more offences that they commit. We'd like to see more victims of crime. And at the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing it harder to get sent to prison in the first place. Fewer and fewer people going into prison for custodial sentences. So I do think we have a real problem with the Sentencing Act. I think it probably is right to look at the whole thing again, because we're seeing some really perverse outcomes.
But then you're going to be back where we were 2 years ago, where, there was a crisis that prisons were going to overflow if they didn't take urgent action. And now you've got, headroom of 3,000 vacant spaces, I think, in prisons across England and Wales. So if you repeal that act, you're going to be back to square one, aren't you?
Well, part of the problem with the Sentencing Act in particular is it just makes some blanket changes to people's sentences. It doesn't allow the Lord Chancellor, for example, to intervene in particular cases. It just looks at particular crime types and says, that's it, you're getting out early. So it doesn't take into account any risk around individual prisoners, the risk they might pose to other people in the community. So I think we do need a fundamental look again, that it's not just about, most people don't want to see prisoners released early, full stop, but we need to look at the mechanisms in which this government has put in place to do that, because I think they are going to cause real problems for people across the country.
So you could have a much more tailored scheme, you think?
Absolutely. If you look at some of the previous early release schemes, they were much more nuanced, and whereas the Sentencing Act has taken a really blanket approach, and it sees people not just released early from prison, but making it harder for people to go to prison in the first place. And one of the great ironies, sadly, about this awful case with Andy Harper is that following his death, Parliament passed new legislation known as Harper's Law, which meant that if those individuals had committed the same offence now, they would be serving a whole life sentence. And yet we're in a situation where actually they're likely to come out of prison early.
So when you heard that 2 of his killers were or might be eligible for early release, what did you think?
Well, it was shock when I heard the news last night, quite frankly, and I can only imagine what the family were going through. We know, I've been well aware of the challenges that the Sentencing Act would bring, but the government certainly said during the passing of that legislation that they were seeking to prevent these most egregious cases from happening. And actually what we see is time and time again, we see these problematic cases coming through, and that's why I think it's quite right that we have a fundamental look again at what is a very fresh piece of legislation, but we can already see the ill effects.
This is a former colleague of yours.
So he was a much-loved member of Thames Valley Police, and I've met many times with his widow. Organisationally, across the whole policing family, people still feel this as an incredibly raw event. We had a memorial service recently to unveil a memorial in Reading to Andrew Harper, but it's not just within policing. I think across our communities in Thames Valley, people really felt this incident. They felt the impact of a brave police officer going out to do his duty, dealing with a reported burglary, and then paying the ultimate price for it. That's why I think it's right that the law was changed, and the public would expect the government to take action and change the legislation.
It is an appalling story, absolutely shocking. I wonder whether some people watching will worry that the Conservatives, you're a Conservative yourself, are politicising this terrible personal tragedy for their own ends. What do you say to that, given when you look at the crisis that the incoming government in 2024 had to deal with? Some of that, a great part of that was because the Tories had been in power for 14 years and they hadn't built enough jail places. Do you accept that?
I've always been really clear. I think governments of all parties have failed to invest enough in our prison system. Frankly, it's not something that the public are ever interested in until there is a crisis. Putting millions of pounds into prison building is never an election-winning strategy. And undoubtedly, previous governments have failed, and this government need to redouble their efforts if they want to get us out of this. But the solution cannot be to let dangerous people back out onto our streets, which is going to put the public at risk now. And I've worked with Lizzie and her family as part of that process to get Harper's Law in place. I don't see anybody politicising this. I see a tragedy. And I think everybody across the political spectrum, I hope, wants to see his killers serve their sentence.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting, as you say, you know, the public's not interested in this until there's a crisis. But if you look at the figures, I went back and looked at the figures today. The UK has one of the highest incarceration rates in Western Europe. So the prison population doubled in size between 1992 and 2012. Are we still sending too many lower-level offenders to prison, do you think?
Well, we certainly won't be with the Sentencing Act. It's going to be quite hard to get yourself sent to prison. I think there are some fundamental changes I think we do need in our prisons. We have a massive problem of drugs within our prisons. You know, people going into prison, coming out addicted to more drugs than they went in with. That's a really serious issue that we need to get to grips with, to make prison actually work. Absolutely, it should be a punishment, but we should also be seeking to rehabilitate people while they're inside. So I think we should do more around that. I also think we need a more honest conversation with the public about sentencing, because the idea of early release is not a new one. We've seen for years people talk about having an amount off your sentence. I think for most people, they would expect someone to serve the sentence that a court decides. So actually, even if those numbers were slightly lower, actually knowing that someone is going to go to prison for that period and perhaps have a period of licence beyond that would be a much more honest approach. And what we've seen, sadly, is that we can talk tough about a high tariff for an offence. But frankly, if everybody, from the public to the criminals themselves, know that they're never going to serve that offence, then it serves no purpose.
Do you think the public would be up for that honest conversation?
Well, I think honesty is surely the only way forward to tackle issues like this. I don't think we should shy away from locking people up. I think it's right to have punishment for people who break the rules. It is also right for public protection to keep people locked up. But while they're there, we should be seeking to rehabilitate people. We should be seeking to get people off drugs, teaching them to read and write if they're not able to, getting them in a state where they can maybe get a job and contribute to society after they leave. But you don't achieve that by letting thousands of people out of prison. And at the bottom end of the system, what this Sentencing Act does means that swathes of people will not go to prison for what some people might be considering low-level offences. But these are prolific offenders who perhaps hound our shopkeepers on our high streets, you know, tens, if not hundreds, of shoplifting offences and no meaningful punishment. That cannot be right.
You said it would be quite hard to get yourself sent to jail under the new Act. But why do you think it is that we do jail more people than in other parts of Western Europe? Why do you think that is? Well,
I think we need to look at the use of prison in its effectiveness. I think we have a problem about the lack of rehabilitation work, as I've talked about. The drugs problem in prison is a very serious one. So what you will see
is the repeat, the cycle of
reoffending. What you often see is people going into prison for a relatively short period of time, and they come out and they're committing the same offences again. Does that mean prison doesn't work as a concept, or does that mean actually the way we're running our prisons is ineffective? And I think actually at a time when the public would expect the state to have the most control over someone's life while they're in prison, actually we still see violence at levels that is really concerning. We see drugs at a level that is really concerning. We see drones being used to get drugs in and out of our prison. So there's a much wider issue about the effectiveness of our prison system, as well as the length of time we send people there for.
Just finally and briefly, the new Defence Secretary, Wes Streeting, has apologised for joking about the early releases. Do you accept that apology?
Well, I think it's certainly ironic, the timing of that. We see this sort of kerfuffle within the Labour Party over those comments. I think it's really unhelpful. I'm glad he has apologised. I'm glad the Home Secretary has apologised. But early release from prison is not a laughing matter. It's a very serious subject. And on the day that we hear this news that Andy Harper's killers might be released, it's hugely inappropriate.
Matthew Barber, thanks very much.